Welcome to Brain Lady Speaks with Julie Anderson. Julie Brain Lady Anderson is considered to be one of the nation's top experts on the brain-personality connection. She has been inspiring her audiences to fire up their brains and ignite positive changes in their relationships. And now she is here to bring that knowledge to you. The information she shares will help those who hear it to accelerate their success in life and business through the discovery of their natural gifts and maximizing their brain power. When you learn to tap into the potential of your natural gifts and the power of the brain-mind connection, there is no limit to what you can accomplish. Today and every Wednesday on Brain Lady Speaks, you'll explore the latest findings to see how they have practical application in your life. And now, get ready to join Julie Anderson on the Brain Lady Speaks radio show. Take it away, Julie.
Welcome, everyone, to the Brain Lady Speaks podcast today, and I have a wonderful interview that I'm going to be doing. I am Julie Anderson, also known as Brain Lady Julie, and I am so honored and happy that you are taking this time either to watch this interview on the YouTube channel or listen to it as a podcast. We know your time is valuable, and we are honored that you are spending it with us today. I have a wonderful guest, Reneau Peurifoy, and we're going to be talking about difficult emotions and positive psychology. So what an awesome topic. But before we bring him on officially, let me read you a little bit of his bio so that you know a little bit of his background today. Reneau Peurifoy holds a master's degree in counseling and is the author of Anxiety, Phobias, and Panic, Taking Charge and Conquering Fear. That has sold over 200,000 copies. Audio versions of this book and his second book, Anger, Taming the Beast, have just been released on Nightingale Conant by Nightingale Conant and are now available on at audible.com. Reneau was in the private practice for 20 years as a marriage and family therapist specializing in anxiety disorders. His newest book is Why Do You Feel That Way? Ooh, good title. Reneau also has developed a YouTube channel that features videos on a variety of practical life skills. Very happy to have with us today, Reneau Peurifoy. Welcome to the Brain Lady Speak Show.
Well, thank you. It's just a delight to be here.
Oh, very happy to have you here. And it was kind of exciting when I was reading over all the information that you are actually kind of close to us in proximity. So it'll be real easy to stay connected. What a great topic. In 20 years in marriage and family therapist. That is it's a very interesting background. So I always like asking my guests to kind of start out with a little bit of background on you as an individual, Reneau. What made you choose, what led you into the path of wanting to be a therapist, someone who was specializing in the areas that you chose?
Well, as a kid, I was always interested in animal behavior. We had chickens, and we had cats, dogs and rabbits, and raised all kinds of different things and stuff. And in high school, I was interested in what then was called entheology. A guy named Conrad Lorenz had just first discovered imprinting and some of that type of stuff. And so in biology, when I was biology major, I was interested in animal behavior. And then later on, I had a friend of mine who was a counselor, and that got me interested in working with people. And I often joke it was a step down from animals, but animals are so easy to understand. Actually, people are too after you get to understand how emotions and stuff work. But I've always been a service person. I've always been somebody who likes to help people and teach. So it was kind of a natural progression. And I really enjoyed working with anxiety disorders. That's what I specialized in because people get better. So it was a fun thing to work.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm finishing up personally a brain health coaching certificate through Amen Clinics, and he focuses a lot on that, on the anxiety disorders and the reasons behind that and the ways to help. And it is so amazing to hear the before and afters kind of the when someone gets the right therapy, whether it's cognitive therapy or natural supplementation or medicines, right? Whatever it is, it's just the before and after.
Right.
Really is miraculous. So I would assume in your position, it was very fulfilling to be able to see the positive results.
And I was in the leading edge of it because when I first started, I went to the local university, and in 3 days, I was able to read all the research that had been done on anxiety disorders. And within 3 years, that was impossible. It kind of exploded. And so I was one of the early pioneers in the area. And I kind of used a shotgun approach. I just, everything that I knew, we would do it all. And then the things that stuck and worked for a particular person would be different for another person. So it was what we call the multimodal approach. And it was kind of fun because the conferences, the national conferences, you had your three general groups. You had your psychodynamic people, you had your cognitive behavioral people, or your cognitive people, and then your behaviorists. They're all kind of separate initially. And the cognitive people would get up and talk, and everybody would kind of, shoot spitwads at them and, joke and stuff. And then the other group would get up and I said, well, wait a minute, but each of you have something to contribute. Let's put it all together. And of course, nowadays that's the standard multimodal approach to it. Is you do a little bit of everything, and it all seems to work together.
I like that, finding the synergy
Hmm.
of the balance of using it all, because the brain is so complex,
Right,
and brain chemistry is so complex, and it's so affected by where you're at mentally and what your thought processes are, that being able to bring all of those together, because it's no one particular fix for everything, right?
right.
And I might mention to any of the listeners or anyone who's watching that this is really an informational interview, and we're going to talk about different things. But if you are under the care of a physician or any type of a therapist, then by all means discuss any options with them first.
Hmm.
Don't just jump and change because you heard Julian Reneau say something, right? Really
Right.
investigate it, or follow and reach out to Reneau as a therapist and see what might be a good fit. But I want to do that, that disclaimer. And if you're feeling stress and anxiety and you need to reach out for help, then by all means do so. That's one of the things
Hmm.
that I appreciate about the current move with understanding different mental states, is that it's desensitizing it. You've been in this for a while, so you've probably seen a huge shift
Well,
in.
when I first started, people had been suffering for years and years and years. And when I left private practice, it was nice because I'd see people where their first panic attacks had started like 3 months before or so, and just the awareness had really increased. And of course, nowadays it's even much more so. I mean, you see it in TV and all over the place, and so people kind of can identify what it is. Sometimes they have a hard time finding the right person to work with, but there is a lot more awareness of the different anxiety disorders, and especially what I worked a lot with, which was panic disorder. So, although
Now that
I did work with some of the other stuff too. So,
right. Which kind of brings me to the next thing that pops into my head
mhm.
with um the awareness that has expanded so much over the last couple of years. Do you find that sometimes that can work to a negative, in the sense that people might self-diagnose, or people might think, "Oh, I really don't need to go see a professional. I can just read articles or something." Like, do you find that there's this small element? I mean, I think the awareness is
Mhm.
amazing and it's very important, and destigmatizing it to make it so that people are able to talk about it
Mhm.
is very important. But do you feel that there's that little element that might cause some issues?
Well, I think that's true for just a wide variety of things that there's been much more awareness for. But I think on the positive way overbalances that. People who are self-diagnosing and self-treating, and actually, a lot of the anxiety disorders do work well, like with book therapy and that sort of thing. But at some point, they're going to realize that they need to get some more help, and
Yeah.
so it's just if they do go that route, I think it just prolongs them getting what they need as far as to overcome what's going on with them. So for the most part, I think it encourages people to seek help earlier on. So I think that's good. And it's a lot better than having something going on and you have no clue why
Right.
this is occurring. That's I think the most frightening thing, to have either panic attacks or something else happening in your life and you have no clue what's going on. At least if you have a label for it, while that doesn't change anything, at least gives you an area to start to look for help.
Good point. Very
Mhm.
good point. I think it also begins to take some of the, with people that I've interviewed or I've talked to, take some of
Mhm.
the what's wrong with me kind
Right.
of out of the equation so much. It's like
Mhm.
there's a lot of people out here, so it's not like there's something
Yeah.
specifically wrong with you. It's, it's a combination of things, but it takes that guilt, I guess is the word I'm looking for,
Right.
off the
And
table.
I think the one downside is people a lot of times become their label. I'd have somebody come in. I'd say,
Mm.
so why are you here? Well, I have panic disorder. I'm codependent, and I'm this and I'm that. And so I'd say, so what does that mean? And they couldn't tell me what it meant. And one of the
Oh,
things I was really big on is, okay, so let's come up with a really simple but clear explanation for why you're experiencing what you're experiencing. And because you have to have that so that you can move on to the next step, which is, what do I do about it? People will spend a lot of times, I don't understand, I don't understand, I have panic disorder, but I don't understand why I'm this way. So you have to have that next step for, what does that actually mean? And then that allows you to focus on, what do I do about it?
gotcha. And I think that's the
Mhm.
big benefit to
Mhm.
seeking out therapy, right? Is then you have
Mhm.
that sounding board or that professional that
Right.
can kind of help you dissect where it's coming from, because you can't fix the problem if you don't know the source, right?
Mhm.
You have to do that. Now, you in your books, so you have the audio version of your books and the anxiety, phobias, and panic. Tell us a little bit about that book first, and then we'll talk about your more recent one.
Well, that's basically it's kind of a workbook. So it starts out and it's set up as a set of lessons, and so at the end of each lesson, you have things to do. And if you work, and it's basically what I would work with clients. So, like, the first lesson is you come up with your simple explanation and you put it on a card and you just read it until you've got it down, so that whenever you say to yourself, I don't understand, well, wait a minute, here's what's going on. And then you move on to your next steps. And, you're like, early lessons also talk about your basic methods for for calming yourself, things like breathing, relaxation, response, externalization, those types of tools. And then it goes on from there into uh, the distorted forms of thinking that people use, should, must thinking, things of that nature. And then it goes into really kind of a psychodynamic component. People with who develop anxiety disorders, because they oftentimes have a really reactive body. It's kind of like everything with human beings exists on normal curve, right? So some people are tall, some people are short, and there's an average height that most people are. And your reactivity of your body is the same way. It's kind of like a house where the wiring's not quite up to code. And so for some people, you know, you got to kind of slap them up the head to get them to notice something. And people who develop, for example, panic disorder, they have a house where the wiring's not quite up to code. So if you plug too many things in, the circuit breakers trip. And
Mm.
typically, their symptoms would start when they're having a background of stress, and was really more of a stress reaction. I'd ask somebody, "So tell me what was going on when you had your first panic attack." Well, I don't know. Life was good. I was going to school full time. I was working full time. My fiance decided they didn't want to, get married. I don't understand. And it's like you say, "What? Back up the truck a minute here. I think I could figure this out."
Yeah,
But
just a little bit of
oftentimes
stress there.
that they're a real achiever. They like to do things well. A lot of times they're out of touch with their body. They don't really want to acknowledge that they have limits. And so they keep on pushing, trying to do all the stuff that they normally do, and overload the body. And it reacts with this panic attack. And now, my gosh, what's going on? And so that becomes their whole focus. And so then that starts the whole thing, that's involved with the panic anxiety cycle that's involved with that.
Yeah. It is interesting that sometimes people, the simplest explanation is missed.
Hmm.
Don't know why it happened, and yet when you really take that 10,000-foot view, or you step out of that
Right.
box that you're in, you're
Hmm.
able you're able to see more. Now, you deal with, in some of the talking points, we were going to talk about anger. So how does
Hmm.
anger tie into that? And when did you kind of make that shift from the panic attack into, or dealing with primarily the panic
Hmm.
attacks and the anxiety, into the anger? Did you find that they were connected, or there was a correlation, or were
Well,
you just
It was connected to the spouses.
Yeah, that's right. Marriage and family therapist, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you work with one person. At some point in time, a lot of times you'll have the mate come in, and then
Yeah.
through that you'll get into some of those issues that they have happening. And oftentimes you have that complementary thing going on with mates. But anger is for me was it's just a very fascinating thing to start working with and just to understand how that works with people. And
Mhm.
with the new affective neurobiology where they've identified the different emotional circuits in the brain,
Yeah.
you know, that's really opened up a whole new window for me too, is to understand how all that stuff works. Because anger is just it's one of your natural responses to threat. And fear, of course, is the other one. And you actually have two circuits for each of those. Actually, you have two fear circuits. One is danger, and the other one is separation anxiety.
Mm,
And you see that with kids, right? And that's
right.
part of what makes us sad when people are away, that as adults and love. But those two things kind of interact. But the thing with anger is we tend to think of anger on its high level. But whenever you assert yourself, whenever you're irritated, it's the same circuit. And so if you think of anger as just kind of on a spectrum, on the low
Mm,
end is irritation, and on the high end is rage. And this anger thing that we label as anger is usually somewhere in the middle. It's
mhm.
just how high the dial is turned up. And the positive side of anger is this gives you focus and energy and motivation to take care of that threat. And so when you're asserting yourself, somebody does something you don't like, please, I'm not, I don't like that. That's a low level of anger that's driving
Mhm.
that behavior. In fact, that's part of the key to managing anger well, is to be able to tune into things early on and take care of them then before you escalate to that high level, and then you start doing things that are really inappropriate.
Yeah, that's interesting. The way you explain it is helps it to be very understandable. So,
Mhm.
in some cases, that anger is justified, and it acts as that protection.
Well,
What
whenever you set limits, anger at a low level is what's driving, giving you the energy and motivation to do that. You're harnessing it in a very protective way, as opposed to a destructive way when you've allowed it to escalate out of control. I'm
right?
getting a little bit wild with my hands here.
That's okay.
So,
Gesturing's good, right?
yeah,
So
I just spent 10 days in Italy, so I got the hand thing going on.
that was the influence. It was the
Yeah.
Italian influence. Um, so then, how do you monitor that within yourself? If you find that you're a person, or you're close to a person who tends to let it go into the red zone where it
Mhm.
shouldn't be, how do you monitor that within yourself to kind of put the brakes on and
Mhm.
re-engage? Because I would guess, I haven't studied anger specifically, but I've done a lot with fear and
Right.
anxiety, and
Right.
how the amygdala kicks in and
Yeah.
shuts down that prefrontal cortex, and your cognitive thinking begins to slow. I'm assuming anger does the exact same thing, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
it
That's
you do.
working through the
How do you
same.
what are your tips to re-engage and get your higher thinking to step in and pull yourself back or slow yourself down from
Well, when
allowing
you're
your
dealing
anger to
with
get to inappropriate stage?
right, when you're dealing with people where they have explosive anger, especially in domestic violence situations, the first step is always to get a walk away strategy in place, so
Mhm,
that when they start to get that high anger, they just train themselves. I walk away and I calm down and I focus on what's really going on. Um, I mean, when you look at people who deal with their emotions well, they tend to do that anyway. Something happens and you'll see them stop for a moment and kind of, you know,
mhm.
calm down, and then they re-engage that frontal lobes, and they start thinking again, and so they have a more logical way of directing that emotion. And again, people who are explosive, again, a lot of times they learned that through childhood. A lot of times it was modeled off of a parent. Sometimes it's cultural. You just learn that, somebody gets in my face, I'm going to bang heads and make them sorry. Uh,
Mhm.
and so that becomes a habit pattern. And
Right.
so, in fact, that's one of the myths that you'll find with people who have explosive anger is they'll tell you, well, I can't help it.
Mhm.
And yet, if they're in front of the judge, if they're in front of, in some place in front of their boss or something, they control themselves usually pretty well. They only explode when it's, quote, safe to explode, right? So
Gotcha.
the truth is unless you're a very small percentage of the population with some brain problems, you can control your emotions as an adult if you choose to, and if you practice that behavior. Because again, it's something you have to practice so that it becomes as automatic as the exploding used to be. And of course, you will unfortunately go back to old patterns when you're sick, hungry, tired, under stress, right?
Right.
But you can learn that, and people do. Unfortunately, a lot of times they will only practice that when the law gets involved or there's some major consequence to their
Mhm.
behavior. Uh, but you can control yourself if you practice it, and the benefits are important because not controlling it has very negative consequences, which is another thing that they often do is they'll minimize the negative consequences. Well, so I got hot. What's the big deal? People can deal with me.
Right.
The reality is nobody wants to deal with it, so you tend to be a very lonely person, which oftentimes makes you want to be more in control more, which again escalates the anger, and so it becomes a real vicious cycle that's going on.
Right. Right. But it is very true. And as you said, you can retrain, you can create new habits in the brain. So
Mhm.
it's retraining that thought process. And sometimes do you find that it is really being open and honest about your past to figure out where it started?
Yeah, and usually that's not a big mystery. My first intake with people is I would do a genogram and a picture, kind of like a pedigree, like you do with pets, but a genogram of the family background. Then I'd have them describe the important adults in their background, and then I'd have them give me early recollections from when they were, elementary school, middle school, and high school. And after I did that, I would make some guesses. I would say, I would suppose this is a problem, and they would think I was some kind of genius, right? When it was
Right.
right there on the paper in front of me, right? Uh, so yeah, past programming, modeling, the experiences you've had, all that contributes into it. And I think depending upon how severe the problem is, a lot of times you have to go back and take a look at some of that stuff. Uh, the other thing with anger, a lot of times they need to reconnect with their emotional network because oftentimes they have emotions that are taboo for whatever reason. For example, it might be a taboo to feel weak or to have a sense of helplessness. I'm working on the car. Gee, I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm competent. I got a part left over. Enter the wife. How's it going, dear? You know,
Yeah.
and of course, it feels better to have anger going coursing through my body and that adrenaline than to experience myself as being weak or helpless. And so, converting
Mm,
those feelings to anger is a very common thing that people will do when they have those kinds of emotional or situational states that are taboo for them. So, kind of reconnecting with that, making that okay, and then giving some options for how you deal with it. An example I give in the new book is for me is I lived for 2 years in Japan with my wife. She's Asian, and we would go in department stores and stuff, and I would start to get really irritable and then start nagging at her and stuff. And after a few times, your spouse is very kind because they point that out to you.
right, right.
And
What's wrong with you?
yeah, so I did some reflection on it. I says, okay, so what's going on? So the reality is my Japanese was just really rudimentary. There's a lot of cultural stuff I didn't understand, and I was embarrassed. And
Hmm.
for me, embarrassment was not okay at that time. So what I started doing is before I'd go to the department store with her, I'd say, okay, I get embarrassed because I don't know the language that well. I don't know the customs, and so then I'd be able to experience my embarrassment, which was I don't like it, but you can do it. It's not going to kill
Right.
you, and that seemed to stop the anger. Or if I started to flare, I'd stop and I'd ask myself, so what's going on? Am I really just embarrassed? And as soon as I connected with that, then that secondary anger would go away and I could get in touch with the embarrassment. And then that gave me all of my mental energy to deal with the situation. Because when you're using anger or any other emotion to cover up something that's taboo,
Mhm.
you go into kind of a robotic behavior
Yeah.
because you're using so much of your mental energy to suppress that thing that you don't want to experience that you're really not dealing with reality with your full faculty. So
Right.
that's a very common thing that people do as well.
Yeah, and it's fascinating when you look at the brain scans of situations like that.
Mm,
You have those lower regions of the brain, the emotion portions and the action portions are just on fire with
mm,
activity. And the upper regions, which is that logical thinking portions of our
mhm.
brain, just kind of go like dark.
Mm.
you know, and that makes it so you can't think your way through. So you have
Right,
to take that pause and figure out what are you really feeling and why are you really feeling it and what's a proactive way
right.
of
And,
dealing
and
with
just
that.
reconnecting with the emotional network sometimes becomes important. And it's
Mhm.
really not that hard to do. I would have people, maybe a guy in my, because the opposite of explosive is the person who suppresses, right?
Right,
So he's
which is
telling you about,
also unhealthy for the body.
yeah, he's ripping the arms off the chair, and you say, so, gee, you seem angry about that. No, I'm fine. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so you have to reconnect that emotional network. And the way I would have people do that is I have them identify times in their life when they would experience various emotions like anger or fear or embarrassment, and then identify what did you do at those times? What kind of things did you say? What were your behaviors? And so now, whenever you see yourself doing that behavior, that's your angry behavior, that's your
Mm,
fearful behavior. And so that's another way to start to reconnecting your emotional network, as well as just practicing for a few weeks, just stopping every now and then, saying, "So what am I experiencing right now?" And trying
yeah,
to reconnect until that you become very open to that. If you're transparent to your emotions, it's interesting. They flow through you more, and they don't get bottled up. You watch little children, they're just open to their emotions, right? They're angry one moment, then they're happy, then they're
yeah,
sad, and then there's something else, right? And they don't get stuck on their emotions the way adults do, because a lot of times they're not okay, or we're blocking them for one reason or another. So the more you can let emotions flow through you, and that doesn't mean you act them out. Emotions
right.
are supposed to be acted on, not acted out. But when you can experience them and then take appropriate action, then it seems like you're ready to move on to the next thing again much more quickly.
When the emotions get bottled up like that, what do you see happens to a person's health? But the reason why I ask is because
Mhm.
years ago, when I got fascinated with the brain, was the study of psychoneuroimmunology, that connection between,
Mhm.
your thinking and your mind and your chemistry in your brain and your immune system. So in
Mhm.
your experience, what have you seen when a person doesn't deal with their emotion, keeps it bottled up or keeps it or suppresses it? What happens to them physically?
Well, it's whenever you have a lot of stress in your body, that raises your cortisol levels, and of course that dampens your immune system. Your fight or flight mechanism is designed so that when it gets triggered, everything that's non-essential gets shut down, and everything that you need for fighting or running away gets boosted up. And so
Right,
things like digestive shut down. That's why a lot of times when you're anxious or you're angry, things don't digest well. Uh,
right,
you know, um, and of course, the immune system shuts down temporarily because you don't want a lot of body repair going on if you're running or fighting.
right,
And normal situations in the past, that dangerous situation would pass fairly quickly, and your body would reset to its uh, basic nurturing mode. But if you've got a lot of stress that you're carrying and you're just constantly, I mean, you see this with presidents. You look at any president, the picture when they enter office from the time that they leave, they've
oh yeah,
aged like about 5 times the normal rate. And it's because they got so much pressure on them, so much tension, anxiety, that their immune system and their basic rebuilding systems in their body stay shut down for prolonged periods of time.
right,
And so that's the big thing that happens.
yeah. Very interesting. It's fascinating. And then what's even more fascinating to me is the amount of control that you can have over it when you, as to use your term, become connected to
Right.
those emotion, those,
And I think the key thing for me with emotions is their messages. Their
yeah,
messages about needs that need to be addressed. And if you address the needs, then they move on, and you move on to your next thing that you want to do. Uh, I think that's the key thing, is if you can hear the message that the emotion is giving you, so if some need that either needs or a threat in your life, and deal with it, then everything seems to work much more smoothly. And that's a lot of what you do in therapy. Basically, is you
yeah,
just help people reconnect with what are your emotions telling you, what's the message that you're receiving from it, And it's really pretty simple because if you look at the negative emotions, again, you have threat and you have uh, how you respond to a threat and loss. The threat is either anger or fear. And again, I'm using those in a very broad range,
Mhm.
sense. Anger being from irritation to rage, and fear can be from apprehension to panic, right?
Mhm.
So threat
Mhm.
is going to be fear or anger, and then loss would be some form of sadness, ranging from just disappointment to depression, depending upon the nature of the loss that you're experiencing. So when you're experiencing one of those three emotions, it's simply a matter of asking, okay, where's the threat or where's the loss? And then what do I need to do to deal with that in
Mhm.
an
Mhm.
effective way for me? And that's part of emotion of anger management too, is you have people, when I get angry, okay, I need to stop and think about, okay, is there really a threat?
Right.
Uh, is my emotional response appropriate to it, or is it too exaggerated? And if it's not a threat there, why am I feeling it like it's a threat? If it
Right.
is a threat, am I doing something that's going to minimize it with the least amount of harm to myself and others? And then I would say it's probably an appropriate response.
Got it. That's it. Now, because this makes me think, my brain's, spinning as as you're talking, because you were in marriage, you were in marriage and family work.
Mhm.
Let's talk about the reactions of the spouses. So if you have a spouse that suffers from a panic disorder or gets angry too quickly, what
Mhm.
can the spouse do? What can the significant other person do to not agitate that situation? Because typically that's what happens.
Right.
You agitate it by your reaction, like, why are you tagging me? Or don't act like that. Or what do you do? And
Mhm.
that's not proactive for the mate or the significant other. How do you suggest they handle a situation to diffuse or to help re-engage their partner
Mhm.
into a thought process?
And two very different situations, because if you're dealing with anger, then number one, especially if it's explosive anger, you need to have that walk away strategy.
Got it.
And the
For
mate
both
needs
people, for both members, you mean?
right, but
Yeah.
especially not to follow them and start nagging at them. What's going
Exactly.
on? I don't understand it. Why are you reacting this way? You need to
Yeah.
give them the space and then
Mhm.
allow them to reconnect later on. And usually you have to train them a little bit in conflict resolution, how to focus on the issue. I know when you assert yourself, basic assertiveness training, one of the problems and one of the things you need to first identify is, what do you want?
Mhm.
You can sit there with a couple and you'll say, so what do you want in this situation? Well, and then they do this and then they do that. And I can't stand it when this happens. And I don't want. So what do you want? Well, and then and so what do you want? And sometimes you go for 20 minutes before they focus on, well, here's what I really want or need in this situation.
Mm.
That's usually your starting point when you're talking
Mhm.
to somebody in a conflict situation, whether it's your spouse or whoever. So training them to, identify, what really is that you want, what's going on, how do you negotiate? Uh, the number one thing that's going to tell you that a relationship is in trouble is if one partner won't talk about issues.
Mhm.
If they just walk away, I don't want to talk about it, and that's their response whenever a conflict comes up, you can pretty much guarantee that relationship is going to end.
Right.
Probably the number one predictor. So, teaching people to, number one, get in touch with their issues for themselves, and then being able to negotiate that in a way that's appropriate with the other person, so they can come up with a mutually acceptable solution to it.
So it might be different based on the personality of the
Right.
individuals that, yeah.
And some people are just non-negotiators and they're not willing to change, and
Yeah.
that's the unfortunate truth that also you have to deal with, is sometimes people are unwilling to take those steps. I know
Right.
one of the things I like to talk about is mate selection, and
Mhm.
such a big issue nowadays, and
Yeah.
people have such unrealistic expectations, and is the person capable of doing these things?
Right.
And some people, for a variety of reasons, are not capable and they don't want to become capable. They're happy
Mhm.
with, or they're satisfied, I should say, with how they deal with the world. So
Mhm.
that's a reality too. Sometimes you have to deal with. So
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes we set our expectations on somebody
mhm.
else and expect them to reach that, and they were never at that
Right.
point to begin with.
Yeah, because with marriage counseling, things either get better or they fall apart.
Yeah,
It speeds up that falling apart process sometimes,
yeah,
if one party is not willing to engage in the process.
yeah. Well, this is such a fascinating topic. So your first book is more of a workbook, you said.
Well, all
What
of them are.
all of them are. Okay, so your
That's
anger
why I'm
taming
a teacher at heart.
got it. Right, so it's always gonna be homework.
Yeah. So
So you're
even in fact, the anger book, the thing that's kind of interesting about it is I follow four people, and two of them have explosive anger, and two of them suppress. And so as I kind of follow them as I go through the steps, and you kind of see, okay, here's what they're doing, and again, here's how you apply this principle as you go through the book.
got it. And that's your newer one, the one on anger, taming the beast?
Well, yeah, that's been out for a while, but yeah, the brand
Oh,
new
okay.
one is why you feel the way you do.
Oh, right, 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 right.
Yeah,
So
that's coming
tell
out
us
in
about that
in
one. That's
spring. Yeah,
so that's the
spring.
one where you follow like 4 people?
No, no, that the anger one is the four people.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
got
No, the one coming out, I'm focusing on the new things in affective neurobiology, where they've identified the seven basic core emotional circuits that we're born with that we share with all the other mammals, your pets and everything else. And it's interesting because if you look at the 20th century, the last century, most of the neurobiological research was on cognitive stuff, memory, reason, vision, those types of things. And the affective side was kind of put aside. I mean, there had been some work in the past, in the 20s or 30s, I forget which, a guy found that you could put electrodes in cats and make them angry or curl up and sleep and stuff. But then that kind of was just put aside because the focus seemed to be, again, the cognitive side. And then a guy named Panksepp is kind of the father of modern affective neurobiology. He started working with the rats. He was known as the rat tickler, and started identifying these circuits that actually all mammals share that generate your emotions. The one that I found most interesting was something called your play circuit. All mammals have this. Excuse me, not play, seeking. Seeking is what I'm thinking of. All mammals have this seeking circuit. So if you watch like little babies or kittens or whatever, they're always exploring the environment. And that's actually an emotional circuit that drives us to go out and to explore environment. It's why when you go into a new building or a new room, you sit down, and the first thing you do is you kind of check it out, and or if somebody new walks into the room, the first thing you do is your attention goes there and just identify what's going on, and that's an actual emotional circuit. And I never thought of it in those sense, but it makes sense. And it's part of what, again, drives us to want to learn new things, get into hobbies and stuff. And then the play circuit is another interesting circuit because he can take these rats and he could actually take all of the higher parts of the brain off and they still want to play. So it's a very deep circuit
interesting.
within them. And again, you see that with kids. I've got my great granddaughter. We watch on Mondays and Tuesdays, and she loves to be tickled. And she loves to be wrestled. And just play is just part of her nature, and that's how mammals learn to interact socially. Is they learn
Mhm.
the limits. What can I do, and when do I go too far? And I can see that with her. Because sometimes she goes a little too far, and so you give her the look. Well, Sophia, no, I don't like that. So, and
Mhm.
then she learns, okay, that's the limit. And I watched videos of, for example, like a gorilla with a little baby gorilla's poking the adults,
Oh,
and the
yep.
silverback. And at some point, he looks around. He says, "Enough of this."
Right.
And so they learned that's the social limits. And so within mammals or very social animals, that's a circuit that helps us learn that. And it's also part of what bonds us as people. That play. That's why we
Right.
like to joke around, and humor is a big thing as we get older. Yeah, so
So fascinating.
these circuits were fun to read about.
Yeah, and it's fascinating when you look at the practical application of understanding that,
Mhm.
learning that as a child and interacting like that as a child. This is one of the reasons I I get on my soapbox every now and then about schooling because I homeschooled my kids for 16
Right,
years and it's just there's so many things about the school system that is anti-brain friendly.
right,
And one of those things is too much homework because if there's too much like children learn as
yeah,
you just said how to interact with the world so much through play. through just being out in the
Yeah, yeah,
environment and experiencing. And if you're locking them in and giving them too
yeah,
much sit at the table work, you're not fostering the emotional growth of the child. You're just trying to
yeah.
foster the intellect, which takes it out of balance, in my opinion.
And of course, our modern schools are set up for well-behaved little girls, and they're
Yes.
really not designed for boys.
Oh, yeah.
They've taken away all of the stuff that boys like to do. In terms of the rough and tussle and the climbing and the tag and all that, and they watered it all down. And
Yeah.
it's yeah, they've reduced recess and a lot, like here out in my area here. So the guys can't get out there and get that activity going that they need. So yeah, it's interesting how
Yeah.
things have evolved.
Definitely a few improvements that could be made.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well,
Well,
and then I had a son who was ADD, so I really could
yeah.
see that within the school. So
Yeah. And I think when you understand that it goes all the way back to 6 weeks gestation, if that Y chromosome is present, that brain gets this chemical bath. And that
yeah,
actually little boys come out the chute, so to speak, right brain dominant, they need the physical. It's going to be more difficult for them at the earlier ages to do those basic math, reading, spelling. That's why
right,
boys
right,
tend to, in
yeah,
general, speak later, aren't as articulate, because
yeah,
they're more of the physical, like you said, and they
yeah.
need to have that physical interaction. So I'm not a proponent of separating the genders, but definitely a proponent of trying to do more physical activity in.
Although it is interesting, if you watch a lot of 5-year-olds, they do oftentimes self-segregate into the girls. They're over there
Yeah.
talking and building and sharing, and the guys have got their hierarchy and they're hunting.
Yeah. They're doing the rough and tumble. This is true. This is true. Well, you know what? This has been such a fascinating conversation,
Mm,
Renaud, and there's so much more that we could speak about, but I want to make sure that the listeners or those watching have the ability to stay connected with you.
mhm,
So what is the easiest way? We've got your website is
mhm,
yemotions.com.
right.
And is that how they're gonna find out information about your new book?
That has links to everything that I do. So that's the easiest thing to remember, easiest way to connect with me. So
Nice.
and
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 you
you can sign up for notifications if you want. I've got a little thing there for a email list. So
got it. And you also tell us a little bit about what you discuss on your YouTube channel.
just a variety of things. I've got a couple that deal with panic disorder. I've got some stuff that deals with anger, some things on emotions, assertiveness, just a lot of self-help types of things that I've extracted out of my books and I've made into videos. So
Very nice, very beneficial. And
mhm.
obviously in the format where a lot of the visual learners
Right, right.
can take a look at that. Can take a look at that. That's wonderful. So you can get, and then you also have the audio versions now coming out of your two previous books.
So
So
it's just recently released the audio versions for the anger and anxiety books, and actually I've got a second anxiety book where I follow 4 people into what I call long-term recovery. The other term for that is relapse prevention.
nice.
So because a lot of times you'll have somebody who's been anxiety free and they'll come back 6 months or 8 months later and they'll
Sure.
say, well, yeah, I've had some panic attacks. I understand that.
Yeah.
And so you go through the old checklist. Well, tell me what's going on, with your mate, your kids, your work, your life goals. And they'll usually say, well, everything's just fine. This happened, but it wasn't that big a deal. And of course, that's your
All right.
sign
Get
that, yeah,
triggered.
maybe it was a big deal. Maybe it's something you can deal with. So,
Yeah.
so we talk about those types of things and some of the other things, the deeper issues that sometimes people need to address. Uh, and then the new book actually will come out in audio at the same time. So the Why You Feel the Way You Do will have an audio version as well as the print version, and that'll come out uh, late winter, early spring of next year. So yeah, 23.
Very nice.
So
Very nice. Well, Renaud, it has been such a pleasure having this
mhm.
conversation with you. I love the really understanding the how to deal with those difficult emotions and move forward, manage them, address them. Don't suppress them and try to make them go away. You have to know
Mhm.
what it is and why. So thank you very much for being a guest on the Brain Lady Speaks show today.
Well, thank you. It's been a real delight. So,
Absolutely. And for those of you who are listening, follow those links, stay connected to Reneau. If you are watching, all of those links, of course, will be down in the show notes on the page. And if you
mm,
felt this was a great interview that you think other people
mm,
would enjoy hearing or would like the information on, then by all means, give us a thumbs up, make a positive comment, and share it. Share it
mm,
within your network. Show us some social media love. We would really appreciate that.
mm.
If you have a topic you'd like discussed on the Brain Lady Speak show, or you'd like to be interviewed, or you know of somebody who would like to be interviewed, maybe if it's just a book you want to see reviewed. There's a lot of different books that I may have already taken a look at. So give me a call or send us an info or a note at
Mhm.
info@brainladyspeaker.com, and yeah, we will address it. We will read it and hear you and see you. So with
Mhm.
all of that, I want to thank everyone for listening today. I'm honored with your presence, and Reneau, I am also honored with your presence. So thank you once again for being here with us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I want everyone to, as always, take a nice deep breath, go out there and simply enjoy every moment.
Mm.